press pass reinstated. But what does it mean for everybody else? Byron York, writing yesterday, said, and I quote, the Acosta decision could make it easier for White House officials to kick reporters out, end quote. Joining me now to discuss is former White House press secretary and senior advisor to the America First Action PAC, Sean Spicer, along with former Ronald Reagan aide and author of the forthcoming book, Swamp Wars, Jeffrey Lord. All right, gentlemen, let's talk about the new rules the White House has laid out for reporters. Actually, will they be followed by Acosta and his colleagues in the press room? Or is the White House going to need to come up with a maybe 3 strikes and you're out plan? Sean, your view on this new announcement for the White House?
Well, Governor, it's great to see you. I think I talked about this in my podcast with Kellyanne Conway. This is a discussion about content versus conduct. And I think there's a very capable press secretary that's right now able to discern the difference between the two. No one has a question about the content of any reporter's question. They can ask whatever they want. But their conduct is what's in question. And I think that's what the judge ruled the other day. Will they behave in a way that's professional? Will they respect not just the office of the presidency, but their fellow reporters? And I think that's what this really comes down to. I think there's a great press secretary now, you may know her, that knows how to call balls and strikes. And there's a president that knows how to understand that as well. And I think this is what it comes down to. And where other organizations, no names mentioned, but you may guess them, are trying to blur the lines, is the question about what the content is. No one cares what the reporter asks. They can ask whatever question they want. But the way that these reporters conduct themselves, do they conduct themselves and show respect to not only the fellow reporters, but to the President of the United States and the White House, is what's in question.
Jeffrey, the judge ruled in a rather narrow way. He did not say that the First Amendment was in any way being attacked by Jim Acosta losing his hard pass. It was just that the process was not fully maybe visible to the world, and therefore his Fifth Amendment issue was the only one. But they celebrated as if somehow that they had taken a stand for democracy. I don't remember any of the mainstream media being really that clever, clear, and honest about what that ruling was from the judge last week.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Governor. And Sean has hit the nail on the head. This is about conduct, not about content. You know, in the last couple of days, we've heard from Major Garrett now with CBS. In the Obama days, of course, he was the White House correspondent for Fox. No one remembers Major Garrett acting like Jim Acosta. It's because he didn't. There is a way to do this. Sean has been the White House press secretary. I've been a press secretary to a senator and a congressman before that. This is totally unprofessional stuff. And I think that CNN has to be very careful here of what they wish for. Because now, if there are going to be a set of rules and regulations, then the good press secretary that Sarah is, she's going to have to, and she will, I have no doubt, call them out. You know, one other thing, I took a quick look back at a memory from childhood of JFK's press conferences, where he had adversarial reporters. They were so well-mannered, Governor, it's beyond belief. We have gone so far down the path in the wrong direction with this stuff. And it's almost unbelievable, and I think CNN and Jim Acosta will come to regret it. So will their compadres in the room.
I want to get your thoughts on the fact that the White House Correspondents Association have announced that it's not going to have a comedian roast the media next year at what's known as the annual Nerd Prom. Instead, they're going to have biographer Ron Chernow, who's going to be the featured speaker, to put some perspective on today's politics and history. Last year's speaker, anti-Trump comedian Michelle Wolf, tweeted this in response. She said, and I quote, "The White House Correspondents Association are cowards. The media is complicit, and I couldn't be prouder," end quote. First of all, I'm not sure they had a comedian last year. They had Michelle Wolf, and she just wasn't funny. So, Sean, what's your response to the fact that Correspondents Association, for the first time in decades, has decided that they're not going to have that kind of lack of political humor going on?
You know what? Here's my response. I applaud Olivia Knox and the White House Correspondents Association for doing this. They want to have a dinner that celebrates the First Amendment, and it actually shows that that's what their intent is. So I applaud them for it. because they last year they wanted to have a comedian, and they talked about how this comedian, Michelle Wolf, would conduct herself and talk about the First Amendment, and it wasn't. It was rude. It was disgusting, and I think for them to at least acknowledge the fact that they want to talk about the First Amendment and have a historian do it. I don't know what this individual is going to talk about, but I think at least their intent is right. And I'll give them credit for that, because last year's dinner was disgusting. And what I thought was more appalling about the dinner than anything is that they branded it as about the First Amendment. The comedian, if that's what you call her, wasn't that. And no one in the White House correspondence from NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN said anything about the way that this person, so-called, conducted themselves in the, quote, spirit of the First Amendment. So to see them at least acknowledge that that wasn't the right direction is at least something that I want to applaud and say, at least you got the message.
Well, we'll see how it works out. Jeffrey, Sean, great to have you both.
What they said, though, is that we have to create rules and regulations for conduct, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing that. We're going to write them up right now. It's not a big deal. And if he misbehaves, we'll throw him out, or we'll stop the news conference.
What are your rules going to be? What is it that you're saying?
They're doing them now.
This is over the line, and you lose your
they're
precedent.
doing them now. I mean, we'll have rules of decorum. You know, you can't keep asking questions. We had a lot of reporters in that room, many, many reporters in that room, and they were unable to ask questions because this guy gets up and starts, doing what he's supposed to be doing for him and for CNN, and, just shouting out questions and making statements, too. But I will say this, look, nobody believes in the First Amendment more than I do. And if I think somebody's acting out of sorts, I will leave. I'll say, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you coming, and I'll leave.
And that's exactly what he should do. He doesn't need to call on Jim Acosta. I mean, especially if Jim Acosta is going to act like that, right? I do believe that you need to treat the President of the United States with a certain amount of respect. After all, the American people elected him. And if you respect the American people, you respect the President of the United States. I'll tell you, if I did an interview with President Obama, or even today with President Barack Obama, whether it's Obama, whether it's Trump, whether it's Clinton, whoever it is, anybody who has been the President of the United States deserves some decorum. You don't shout. You don't grab the microphone and not turn it over when someone tries to take it from you. I mean, that is not acceptable behavior. And these are things that these reporters should know. But if they don't, perhaps he needs to train them a little. And if things get wild, just say, okay, enough. I'll come back tomorrow. Here with me now, former Special Assistant to President Trump, Mark Lauder, and former Democratic Alabama congressional candidate, Mallory Hagan. Good to see you both. Mark, starting with you, what do you think of my sense of this? And do you agree with what the president's saying as well tonight? In other words, this is not over, and we'll see how it plays out. But there is a certain kind of decorum, right, that you want to have when you're in the White House at a press conference.
Absolutely. I trained to be a journalist when I was in college and had the privilege of serving as a journalist for the first 12 years or so of my professional life before moving to politics. And the rule number one is don't be the story. You're supposed to be reporting on the story, not becoming the story. And I'll give a lot of credit. Major Garrett, who obviously used to work for Fox News, now is CBS News correspondent, he was handed the microphone when he thought the president called on him, but actually the president was calling on someone behind him. He turned around and gave the reporter that microphone. He didn't grandstand. He didn't whine. He didn't ask his questions anyway, just because he had the microphone. There are certain standards and protocols in place, and it's good that they're going to be writing them down and be able to take action for those who violate them.
Crazy that it's come to this, though, Mallory, right?
Well, I think it's really interesting that our president uses the word decorum, because I think the American people could really use some of that from him. If he wants a room full of people to operate with decorum, then perhaps he should start leading by example. And I think that's what the American people are craving. And so I would love to see him act with some decorum, and then perhaps the press that's in the room with him will follow suit.
See, I watched that press conference. I thought he actually had a lot of decorum. I mean, at one point I was a little bit worried because you saw Jim Acosta holding on for dear life to that microphone, and that young woman that tried to take it away from him, and he kept holding on. And it struck me as an incredibly awkward, difficult moment. And I wondered if the president was actually going to come down off the platform and take the microphone away from Jim Acosta himself. And unfortunately, he didn't. I think he walked away a little bit, then came back. I actually thought that he's shown some pretty decent decorum in a lot of these press conferences. It's not easy, Mark, when you got reporter after reporter screaming at you, yelling at you. I mean, that's one thing in a gaggle, right? One thing in a gaggle, an entirely different thing when you are seated in a traditional style press conference.
Absolutely, and let's not forget, he took 68 questions from, I think, 30-plus outlets for over an hour and a half. That is a lot of decorum.
That's a lot of questions.
And that is something that even many White House correspondents will tell you. They have more access to President Trump than they ever did to Presidents Obama, President George W. Bush. And to the previous point, I think one of the reasons why President Trump was elected was because he was beyond decorum. He actually was about action, not just saying the right things, doing the right thing.
Look, Mallory, you know this well, and you just competed there in a congressional race in Alabama. But Hillary Clinton has said, well, we don't need to be civil, right? We don't need to be civil until we win. We can't be civil until we win. What kind of message is that sending to some members of the mainstream and left wing, for that matter, media?
Well, as a former anchor and journalist myself, I think we all need to recognize that a journalist's job is to get to the truth. So whether President Trump likes the questions that are coming his way or not, the appropriate thing and the decorum that he should approach that topic with is one where he answers it. The American people deserve answers. And what it says to me is that we have lost civility on both sides of the aisle. I'm held to a higher standard as a former Miss America than our president is. And I don't think that that's fair. We need to bring decorum back to the office of the president, and I think that he can start by leading through example.
Well, I'd certainly like to see the press act a little more respectful at times, too. They should ask the questions they need to ask. And you know what? I think you can all look at my interview. My interview where I pressed him repeatedly on things like Helsinki that I had a lot of questions on, as well as a whole host of other topics. And you know what? We did it in a civilized fashion, and that matters right now. Mark and Malik, thank you.
Despite him, I got the family and I got the TV. I think I get the feeling in other interviews that he really wants to. He feels like he can.
I feel like he thinks I should have been Trump. I think that's what he thinks. I think Cuban looks at this and says, wait a minute, why did I let this guy go out there and win the presidency? If I would have run, I would have been able to do it too.
Right.
I could do this. I think he thinks that way, and I think he would like to go one. I think he thinks he could beat Trump one-on-one. Getting through a Democratic primary for Mark Cuban does not seem plausible to me.
It's a long haul.
I've said this before, but far more impressive than beating Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump was winning the primary. It was much, much more impressive than beating. I mean, honestly, I think you could have picked any one of 50 candidates on the Republican side that could have beaten Hillary Clinton in a one-on-one battle.
Yeah, we said
it was the primary that was impressive. Yeah. And, he beat a lot of good candidates from the Republican side in that primary. I mean, they had 17, probably 6 or 7 of them were pretty freaking good candidates.
No doubt about it.
And he beat them all. Anytime you get to a one-on-one situation, anything can happen in those races because a major event, think of it. If let's say the Hillary Clinton was behind by 5 or 6 points, and the tape of Donald Trump on the bus happened 3 or 4 days before the election rather than a month.
Right.
Hillary, maybe be able to make that up, right? Like anything can happen in those last seconds. McCain had no chance of beating Barack Obama with the economic collapse happening a month before the election. There was no chance of it, and anything like that can happen. But when you get into a one-on-one, that's why it's dangerous if a socialist does come out of the Democratic primary. If you get let's say a Bernie Sanders acolyte, right, that comes out of that.
Okay.
If there's an economic collapse a month before, that socialist will win, and then you're in real trouble.
And he looks, yeah.
You know, because they'll pick anybody other than the party in power at that point. Okay, here's another one. Howard Schultz.
Oh, boy, he wants to run.
It does seem like he wants
to.
CEO of Starbucks. If you don't know that story, he built that company. It was a coffee store that did not sell cups of coffee when he took it over. They just sold the beans, so you could go home and make it yourself. Think about that. They turned it into obviously one of the biggest companies in the world. He is they describe him as a relatively business friendly Democrat. Obviously, he comes from a CEO. He's very wealthy. Could spend a lot of money. You know, I don't know. Is it possible?
Sure.
He's much more possible than the next guy, I think, which is Tom Steyer. Steyer, we talked about a little bit last week or earlier this week. He is another billionaire guy, big time climate activist. Made his money. He's kind of like he's like a George Soros type of character. Big time donor to progressive causes. Has been putting his face on TV constantly to try to get Trump impeached.
And I will say, Tom Steyer is now become famous because our own Pat Gray has said that if he were to get the nomination, that he would eat his underwear.
Eat his underwear, right? That's the latest one. Now, I don't know why he would say that, because Tom Steyer, in his platform, has guaranteed health. So if you're sick right now, you will be healed if Tom Steyer is elected president. He's guaranteeing health.
Then I want Pat to be able to eat his underwear.
Right? I mean, look, if you have a sick relative, you're thinking to myself, look, I don't like the tax policy, but if he can make everyone healthy, seems like a good platform.
I'm in love with Tom Steyer.
Not sure how he would pull that one off exactly, but he is. I think he wants to run too.
Yeah,
and I would not be surprised to see an early announcement for him, because people don't really know who he is, despite his efforts.
So if he beats everybody to the punch, he gets coverage.
He gets his coverage, and he'll have money. He has billions and billions of dollars to dump into advertising to get you to know who he is.
Right.
And there is an argument to be made. Anybody who will commit to that has a chance. I personally believe in this day and age, you can't buy an election like that. You can't. I mean, people are like, well, Donald Trump. Yeah, Donald Trump spent no money.
He spent no money.
He won an election with almost, he disproved the point.
He sure did.
All he was a person who was covered by the news media.
He used the election to make himself money because he did events, everything that charged back to the Trump hotels.
There's definitely an argument about that. But I mean, he got a lot of free media because the media is and continues to be completely obsessed with him as a person, completely obsessed with him. They were obsessed with him in New York on the media there when it was only a local situation. Yeah. And now they are absolutely obsessed with him, to the point that they will overturn long-standing beliefs.
It's embarrassing how much they cover this guy for the hatred.
It's true.
It's embarrassing.
It's true. And, you know, I've become obsessed with the idea that because of the way we deal with politics right now, so often we allow these debates to control the decisions that we make. And it's not just us, but it's everybody. You know, the media is a perfect example here. The media has been aligned with the unions and aligned with people like Bernie Sanders for decades to get tariffs passed. They want a protectionist trade policy to go away from these right-wing lunatics like Ronald Reagan,
great example,
and Barry Goldwater and Milton Friedman, and all of these people who have been preaching free trade for 50 years. And the media has been on the opposite side of that battle the entire time, saying, no, unions are important. Now, mind you, a lot of them are on television as members of unions, telling you how important unions are, and they're saying unions are important. We need tariffs. We need protectionism. The Democratic platform has been about that for decades. The second Donald Trump supports tariffs, they all turn into Milton Friedman. You've never seen a more pro-free trade group of people than the mainstream media today, who will tell you every argument Reagan made about free trade. They'll all tell you how it's so much better if there's an economic consensus from economists. They'll go crazy telling you how great free trade is only because Donald Trump opposes it. And again, opposes is strong, but he's certainly a protectionist. He's raised, tariffs by over 100% from previous levels. And they're, if these other proposals are going through, it could be 500, 600, 700% before this is over.
Amazing.
But forget all that for a second. the media is allowing themselves, and the Democratic Party is allowing themselves, and and unions and all these other groups are allowing themselves to have their opinions formed by the fact that Donald Trump has his opinion. They're basing their beliefs on just opposing